Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
4 rabbis got into a debate about Klal Gadol b'Yisrael, b'Torah. What is the greatest principle in the Torah? The first rabbi says, well, obviously, it's that all of humanity is created in God's image. And the second rabbi says, no, it's Shema Yisrael, God is one. And the third rabbi says, no, surely it's the principle that you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the fourth rabbi says, you've all got it wrong. You sacrifice the first sheep in the morning and the second sheep in the afternoon. It sounds very strange, right? But let's think about this. What do you think the experience was like to sacrifice a sheep? Terrible. In what way? It's messy. It's gross. Now imagine that you'd make this daily sacrifice every day, more than once a day, extra on Shabbat. Do you think it, in addition to being gross, gets a little boring? Right? It's not the most glamorous part of the job. And yet, this is part of what the priest does, and that's the point of today's sermon. That sometimes to achieve these high ideals, like all of us are created in the image of God, you do it sheep by sheep. Our Torah portion opens with the story of Aaron returning to the sanctuary to make sacrifices. A few weeks ago, we read about the death of Aaron's children, Nadav and Avihu, who were taken from him suddenly and brutally and without any explanation. And we're told about Aaron's reaction. It says, Vayidom Aharon. Aaron was silent. And the portions continue for a few weeks, and we don't hear anything about Aaron. We talk about kashrut and holidays and skin disease and fungus in the house. And finally, this week, the narrative picks up, and I want to help us understand how extraordinary it is that Aaron walked back into that tabernacle where his children died, and he picked up the duties that they were doing. He continued to make the sacrifices, and the question is, how? How could he go back to doing that? Now, also in this week's portion, we have what's called the Holiness Code. And this is the part of the Torah that we love, because it talks about the great principles like love your neighbor as you love yourself, the things that make us so proud to be Jewish. But embedded right in the middle of the Holiness Code is a very strange sentence. It talks about the shlamim offering, the offering of well-being. What is it doing there? You have to understand the shlamim offering, the offering of well-being, it was not an obligatory offering. It wasn't something you had to bring after you'd committed a sin, or something you had to bring to show gratitude on a holiday. Shlamim offerings are offerings of free will, because you want to. And there's an interesting word there. It says, lirtzonechem, for y'all's will. Right? For you, plurals, will. And the commentators get very interested in what this means. Rashi says, to make a offering, a sacrifice of well-being with lirtzonechem means to do it with intention. So let's read this as a metaphor for the kinds of sacrifices we make in life, not just the sacrifices that were made in the temple and the tabernacle. When we make sacrifices, it's not something that we do impulsively or coincidentally. It's something that we must do with intention. Ibn Ezra has a different read on it. He says it's something you must do with full will. We experience loss against our will. We don't ask to suffer, but we offer up sacrifices of our time, our money, and pieces of our hearts with our will because we believe it will make a difference in the world. Then we have the Ramban, and he says to do something lirtzonechem, according to your will, means that you don't expect a prize in return. And that's true of the daily grind of making sacrifices to make the world a better place. We hope that we will make it live up to the ideals of humanity being created in God's image and loving our neighbors like ourselves. We make those sacrifices with that intention, but there's no guarantee that what we've done will cause that goodness in the world. But we do it anyway. Then there's the Bechor Shor. And he says, Lirtzonchem means you do it for your personal will, not to keep up with the Joneses, or the Goldbergs in this case, right? You don't do it to impress anyone, and you can't do it because that's what they want for the world. It has to come from something you want for yourself, something you want to see better in the world as you, as an individual. So I want to share with you a sacrifice that I went through this week. I attended 2 peace vigils in honor of Jordan Edwards. He was a 15-year-old boy who was shot and killed by a police officer almost a week ago, last Saturday evening. And I got a call from one of my friends who is clergy in the Black community, and he said, "We're having a vigil at my church Wednesday night. Will you come? Will you represent the Jewish community? Will you lead a prayer?" I said, "Yes, I will come." And it was not an easy experience. I drove into a neighborhood that was completely foreign to me, 20 miles from my home. I put aside obligations that I have to you, right? I had intended to write my sermon that evening, and to my family, to tuck my children into bed. I sat in that church and I opened my heart to the brokenheartedness of the Black community. I felt the awkwardness of being in a culture completely not my own. I felt the extreme weight of my white privilege. I felt the shame of very few of our Jewish community showing up to support the Black community, and gratitude for the ones that did come. And when the service was finished, my friend, the Reverend, said, "You know, there's another vigil tomorrow night out in Balch Springs at the Recreation Center. Will you come?" After all of that. And I thought, that's my one day off a week. And I looked at my friend and I said, "Yes, I will be there for you." And I drove all the way out to Balch Springs the next night. And we stood at the Recreation Center. And I watched Jordan's contemporaries. There were many young Black teenagers there, weeping, and their parents trying to comfort them. And the wind was cold that night. We were outdoors. And it kept blowing out the candles that we were holding, but we kept relighting them anyway. The reason I went was Lirtzonchem, because this is an important cause for me. I know that police brutality will not end without me. I know that racism will not end without me helping. And I know that I will not see justice in the world unless I help and make a sacrifice. And we all have something we care about. It doesn't have to be exactly what I care about. We all have something that's important to us, our piece of the world to fix. But here's the challenge. It's like the priest, sheep by sheep. It's not always pleasant, and it's not always easy. We're weighed down by other obligations we have. We're weary. We don't want to show up. And you know what? Sometimes that's okay. Aaron's first response to the death of his children is to be silent. And we don't hear from Aaron for a few weeks, but this week we do, and we open with the words Acharei Mot, after the death of Aaron's sons. And he goes back into the tabernacle and he starts making the sacrifices again in the same spot where his children died. And the reason Aaron does that is because in their time, this was how people reconciled with God and with one another. And Aaron knew if he didn't go back, then the ideals of the world that he wanted to see would never come to be without him. So in honor of the memory of Nadav and Avihu and Aaron, and in my case, Jordan Edwards, find a way to make a sacrifice. Amen.